Hi guys, and welcome back to the high level chess course. I hope you've had a chance to watch the previous videos. Last time we looked at taking control of squares, sort of seizing files or diagonals, and the importance of that, especially in relation to a weak king. You remember from my game, I didn't deserve to win, but I turned it round because I could find a way to attack the king, and I managed to block off the enemy pieces. And the game that I showed you briefly last week also was the Karpov game. And something I'm going to carry on with today is where Karpov played a really interesting bishop move to take control of a file. And it's really unusual. And I think it's something that very striking. One of these things in chess where you think, wow, it's such an interesting idea. Before I go on to that, I'll share my screen and show you this really interesting, I guess we can call it a puzzle, but it's from an actual game. This is a really unbelievable kind of game. It was played in 1915 by Alexander Alekhine, or Alyochin, if you want to pronounce his name correctly, against some kind of randomer, some unknown player. And the amazing thing about this game, obviously, is that there are 5 queens on the board. I think we can call that polygamy or something like that, where the king marries more than one queen. But here, there's a lot of pieces that perhaps are irrelevant to the game almost. I mean, you would notice probably this knight is relevant to the game almost. The rook, again, irrelevant. This bishop, not doing a whole lot either. So when there's so much power on the board, the queens, then the kind of the lesser pieces become almost second rate, because when you've got so much power, it all becomes about the queens. That's the reason. I think this is a particularly interesting puzzle because we have a mate in 5 moves here. Now the previous move was queen took a bishop on f1 here. Okay. Now I'm going to pause the video and see if you can come up with an initial move, because I think the first move in this sequence is a little harder than the others. Pause the video and see if you can spot it. I like this move a lot. Before I reveal it, I'm going to give you a bit of a clue. What do you notice about both of these pieces? What are they? Well, they're minor pieces, yes, but they are pinned. They are both pinned. Notice that technically, this bishop is pinned, and it means it can't move off the diagonal. It's pinned by the queen. And also this knight is pinned by this rook. So therefore, neither of these pieces, well, this knight cannot move, and this bishop can only move along this diagonal here. So how can we exploit that? How can we take advantage? Well, the move, surprisingly, is queen to b4. And I'm going to have to say, obviously there are 3 queens, so I'm going to have to specify which one, which you don't normally have to do. But this one is the f queen, goes to b4. Now, a surprising move, because it looks like it can be taken in two separate ways, but it can't, we know. So black's only move, well, I think there's a possibility that he could go back, but then the king becomes very susceptible to attack. I would say bring the queen down at some point. This queen also, it's probably not a good idea for the king to step back into the line of fire of these 2 queens. So if it comes back here, then that's not good. So the move that black chose was to move the queen here to block white's queen. It looks as though he's creating some kind of nice barrier here. It looks fairly solid, but don't forget that white has got 3 queens, so nothing is ever guaranteed. Pause the video again and see if you can spot the next move. again, we're actually taking advantage of the fact that this knight is pinned. So how can we attack the king? Well, we use this queen to come across to d8. The knight cannot take because it's pinned. So therefore, and obviously we can't block the check, so the king has to move. The king has to go to a6. And I think this move here is perhaps a little easier to see. How will we go about hounding the king? How can we keep it on its toes in this sort of situation? I do like the fact, though, by the way, that both these queens are en prise. They're available to be taken. En prise, by the way, is a French term. It means, well, basically available to be taken. It means that you can take them. But because Black's king's being kicked around, Black never gets the chance to actually take the queens. The move that's played here is queen, I would say, queen E, or E queen, to A3, as opposed to B queen, but E queen to A3, attacking the king. And again, we are limited to blocking. The king actually now is completely stuck. The queen here decides to block. Notice that obviously the knight cannot block. If the queen blocks, well, then we have immediate checkmate. So this is queen there. So here comes a series of interesting moves. Well, interesting in the sense that the notation here is interesting. So the move that we do here is, I believe it's queen. I think it doesn't really matter which queen takes, but anyway, queen A takes A4. So queen takes A4, queen takes A4, and then guess what? Queen takes A4. This is actually checkmate because the knight is pinned still, and this queen's cutting across. So a really interesting game here. If you want to look it up, it's a game between, I'm going to, in fact, I might show you because I've got it here. This is on a different website called chessgames.com. It's between Alexander Alyoshin and, well, NN just means they don't know who it was. And just type in the Harem, or the Harem game from 1915. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that. I think it's incredible. You get 5 queens on the board. It's like you never hardly ever see that. So anyway, I want to do skip to another game now. You might notice I'm using an analysis from another Lichess member, but you know, it's useful sometimes that people upload information to Lichess and games, so you know, you can look through them at your leisure. Nothing wrong with that at all. So this is the game that I touched on last week, where the idea of the bishop a7 move to block the a file was used. But I wanted to go back to the beginning because I wanted to show you the beginning of the game. This is particularly useful for a player, like a higher level player, to have a better understanding of the opening. So it's a Roy Lopez. You might have seen the title. It's the Roy Lopez. So if you play the Roy Lopez, or at least you play this kind of opening, then this will be quite relevant to you. So notice the Roy Lopez is signified by this move. I won't go into too much detail because I realize that you can just watch a video on that yourself on Lichess. But here is the game itself. The Morphy defense, it's called. Bishop goes back to a4. Knight comes out. Karpov is white, he castles. Notice that black could take this pawn, but after rook e1, or in fact perhaps even swapping off and then d4, then you know this pawn becomes weak too. So black might get a pawn first off, but then they would lose it back fairly quickly. So most players decide to play something. I think it's if you have the bishop on c4, I believe this is called the Hungarian defense, but the bishop on e7 here is very typical. The reason is that this bishop here could end up coming to g5, and therefore this bishop is already breaking the pin that it will create. So that bishop going to g5 is no longer a threat. I'm trying to get rid of those arrows. There we go. This is a particularly good move, and if you play this kind of thing as black, I would recommend playing that move. So just keep that in mind. Rook e1 to defend the pawn. b5 to attack the bishop. Bishop goes back. And then, well, we need to release that bishop. Now, we could go to b7. That would be okay, perhaps. But I think a bit of flexibility is always important. And so that means that this bishop could well come out here to g4. So we know that seeing as white doesn't have a bishop here, white needs to find a way to stop the bishop from coming to this square. So what do? Well, we play this move. Oh no, we don't. I didn't look at the notation, but on the next move, that's what happens. Pawn to h3, in order to stop the bishop coming there. The other move that we just saw there, pawn to c3, well, this has got two reasons. Pause the video and see if you can work out what those two reasons are for playing this move. I think reason number one is that we want to provide an extra defender in order to play this move, pawn to d4. Because then, if black takes us, we can replace that pawn with another pawn. So takes. And we have 2 pawns in the center still. So that would be perhaps not the best move for black to take in that circumstance. So that's the reason number one. Reason number two is that it's very likely that this knight could come across. And you'll see the reason now, because the next move is knight a5. Black is keen to swap off this bishop, if they can, because that bishop generally is stronger than a knight. Think of it like 3¼ points compared to 3. And that means that the bishop can hop back to c2, can defend the pawn as well, and also later on provide a bit of an attack down towards h7 if necessary. So a very important sort of sequence of moves here. So c3, the move c3 is a move that I think you should be playing as white if you play the move e4 and you go for that kind of so knight f3 and then bishop c4 or bishop b5 kind of line. Always think about the move c3 if you do play that. Very important. So c5, notice that we're fighting for this square, d4. So we've got 2 pawns on it already. Although white does still have control. White still has three defenders compared to 2 attackers by black. So he's perfectly entitled to play the move d4. He could delay it, that would be perfectly okay. And we'll see in a second exactly how that progresses. So after queen c7, we have the knight coming out. Notice that bishop coming out is possible, but actually it tends to get in the way. We don't really want to swap it off for the knight. It's not really necessary. If it comes here, then we're sort of blocking our rook, and potentially we might end up with our knight coming there later. So we don't want to move this just yet. Also, it's good, perhaps a good defender, maybe later. So the move, oops, oh no, that's not the move. Sorry, excuse me. This move is played, knight to d2. And again, knight to c6 now, because the knight here has done its job. It's already chased away the bishop. So now it's no longer relevant at the side of the board. It's better to come back. So it's putting pressure on the center again, which kind of forces white into a decision. Now I think the move here, d5, is probably the strongest because it gains space. Now notice that if you've got more space in chess, I think I mentioned this in a previous lesson, if you've got more space, you've got more room to maneuver your pieces. If you've got more room to maneuver your pieces, then you can start to launch an attack more easily because your pieces won't be jumbled up. So this is why that's such a good move. I'm going to skip a few more moves because I want to skip to the actual important bit of the game. Notice that there's this really interesting idea on move 17, bringing the knight back to f1 with the idea of perhaps going either to e3 or to g3. You may have seen this before. I'm going to skip again to the interesting situation we had last week with bishop to a7. That was what happened. Now later, I wanted to show you the conclusion of the game. So it was here that I wanted to go from. Notice that black has played the move g5, and I think that doesn't really help him because if you look at the amount of space that black has, it's inferior to what white has. White has a lot more room to maneuver, especially the knights here, notice. Black's knights are very poorly placed, you would say. And any time that white wants, he can retract the bishop and take control of this file as well. But he just chooses to lock the rook in there. So now that there's a bit of a weakness on this part of the board, notice that the bishop comes straight in, and although black tries to kick it out, white doesn't allow that to happen. If white swapped off here, that would be all right for black, because imagine removing people from a bus. If you've got a crowded bus or a crowded train, if people get off the bus, then it makes it more comfortable for you, doesn't it? It makes things less, cramped. So if you've got a cramped bus or a cramped position in chess, you should try to remove some of your players from the bus by exchanging them. Well, white doesn't really care for that. He wants to keep the pressure going. If black exchanged here, then he would be losing his better bishop. This bishop here is at least able to, potentially move between the dark square pawns, whereas this one here is just basically a pawn itself, isn't it? Where can that bishop move? Only backwards, and then after that, again, hardly anywhere. So it's crucial, therefore, that if white is going to swap off either of these bishops, it's going to be this one, the f7 bishop. So knight d8. I'm just going to, again, rattle through a few more moves. You can look this game up in a bit more depth if you like. But I'm just going to show you the conclusion. A couple of strange moves occurred. Rook a3, king f8, rook a2, king g8. The reason why that occurred is because the players were running short of time. They wanted to reach what's called the time control. So normally you have a certain amount of time to complete, say, 40 moves. You can see here they were around about move 37, 38 when this occurred. So they were probably just giving themselves a bit of extra thinking time so that they could reach the time control, just playing moves that don't really change the situation. That's something that you often see in Grandmaster games. And again, Karpov now increases the pressure on these pawns. After king f8, you'll see, again, improving the knight. And the reason for this is that he wants to exchange pieces in this circumstance. Why? Well, let's have a look. The move queen h5 was played. Now notice that the queen is infiltrating into the black position now via this weakness here on the light squares. Notice the dark square bishop has gone, therefore white can infiltrate on the squares that it's left behind. It's not controlling those squares anymore. So even though black tries to swap the queens, it's too late. Notice that this is no good for, if this occurred, then that will give, let me show you, if black took the queen, then that would also give white an excellent position for his knights, and that would be more or less game over, because there's no way that black is going to be able to repel white's attack. There's all kinds of tricks available here, not least that we've still got control of this file. So that's not going to happen. Black decided to play king f8, and after this move, knight h5, black resigns because there's no real way that he can fight on anymore. This bishop is threatened. If the bishop retreats, then you've got all kinds of horrible things like queen takes pawn, knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn wouldn't quite work because of the exchange of queens. Sorry for all the arrows, but perhaps here, you'd lose that pawn for sure. And after the exchange of queens, then again we've got that possibility to come into f5 and annihilate black in that way. So here there's really no way out. Even after queen d7, we have still got, I think, just possibilities to, probably knight g4 would be a good move, something like that, to win that pawn. So you can see here that space is such an important issue, but also identifying a route or what's called a weak color complex. So notice that white infiltrated on the squares that were left uncontrolled by the exchange of the light square bishop, black's light square bishop that was here. So that's quite complicated, but it's all relating to the fact that black is really cramped and white just infiltrated at his leisure. Check out that game if you like. It's Karpov versus Uznica, 1974. Just type that in. And if you don't understand some of the moves, don't worry, you're not the only one. Okay, because Karpov can be quite tricky to study. Anyway, I'm going to unshare my screen now. A complex idea of just not rushing, I suppose, an attack, just sort of bringing your pieces in slowly and noticing a weak color complex. That's the name of it officially. Keep an eye out for that. If your opponent has got pawns all on the same color square, then it means that if you can remove the good bishop, the one that can control the remaining squares around the pawns, then that will give you a good chance to infiltrate, to get into the enemy camp. So give that a go in your games if you can. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time for the final lesson.